I am Naomi, born March 17th, 1909, in Kingston, Jamaica. And I am speaking now because silence would make me guilty again. I was not an observer, I was an insider, an ex-witch who carried out assignments meant to weaken believers who carried real fire. I targeted Christians who were anointed, prayerful, and dangerous to the kingdom of darkness. And I did it knowingly. Like this video now, comment under it, share it everywhere, and do not negotiate with distraction. Watch until the very end. What I am exposing is hidden, forbidden, and violently resisted in the spirit realm, and it is coming out now. If you feel tension already, it is because something powerful is being uncovered and you were meant to hear it. You were marked long before you understood language. That is the first truth you must face. In the covens I served, we did not waste time on ordinary believers. We studied patterns. We traced bloodlines. We watched childhoods. There were people we called pre-flagged, not because of sin, but because of calling. If you survived unusual resistance from a young age, this point is for you. If your life felt contested before it even started, this is not coincidence. I remember the first time I saw your type on our list. It was never your name at first. It was a description. Carries oil. Unusual spiritual weight. Future disruptor. Must be delayed. You were dangerous before you were aware. One of the first signs you were set apart with a dangerous spiritual anointing is early warfare. Not teenage rebellion, not bad decisions, but pressure that made no sense for your age. Night terrors as a child. Unexplained fear, a feeling of being watched, recurring dreams of falling, being chased, or being muted. We understood those signs clearly. It meant heaven had already placed something on you. Parents often misinterpret this. Teachers dismiss it. Churches spiritualize it away without understanding. But in the spirit realm, we knew exactly what it meant. You were already activated in potential. I personally participated in rituals designed to interrupt destiny at the seed stage. We did not attack when people were strong. We attacked before they knew who they were. This is why some of you experienced rejection in safe places, family misunderstanding, isolation without explanation, feeling like you never fully fit anywhere. That isolation was engineered. Anointed people attract pressure because pressure reveals authority. Darkness tests where it senses future dominance. If you are listening and realizing your childhood felt unusually heavy, stay with me. This is not about trauma alone. This is about targeting. Another sign we looked for was unusual spiritual sensitivity. You felt atmospheres before words were spoken. You sensed danger without evidence. You knew when something was off, even when adults told you it was fine. That sensitivity was not weakness, it was perception. In occult operations, we feared that kind of perception, because people who discern early are hard to deceive later. So we attempted to dull it. We used confusion. We used distraction. We used shame. You may have been told you were too much, too intense, too emotional, too serious, too spiritual. Those labels were never neutral. They were suppressive tools. A dangerous anointing often manifests as misunderstood intensity. You cared deeply when others didn't. You asked questions people avoided. You felt responsibility early. That is not normal development. That is mantle pressure. Let me be direct. Darkness does not attack empty vessels. If nothing was on you, no one would bother. The fact that pressure followed you means value preceded you. Another marker we used was survival through things that should have broken you. Accidents that didn't take you out. Illness that didn't finish its assignment. moments where death was close but retreated. We documented these events carefully. Every survival increased our urgency, because survival is confirmation. Some of you should not be alive by natural calculation, and you know it. That is not luck. That is preservation. We hated preservation, because preserved vessels are reserved for future release. The enemy tries to exhaust what it cannot destroy. That is why some of you grew tired before you grew old, burnout without cause, weariness without labor, a constant feeling of being drained. This was not random. It was strategic. You were being siphoned because you carried supply. I need you to understand this clearly. The anointing on your life was never gentle. It was always dangerous. Dangerous to systems, dangerous to deception, dangerous to hidden structures. That is why you encountered resistance when you tried to grow, resistance when you tried to pray, resistance when you tried to focus. We exploited distraction heavily against people like you, because focus activates authority. If your mind has been a battlefield, it is because your spirit carries command. Let me expose something else. We tracked people who attracted spiritual encounters without seeking them. You did not go looking for experiences. They came to you. Dreams that felt real. Encounters that lingered. Moments you could never fully explain. Those encounters were not accidents. They were early signals. Heaven was already interacting with you, and darkness noticed. This is why some of you felt drawn to spiritual things early, even before faith was fully formed. Not curiosity. Recognition. Your spirit recognized what your mind could not yet articulate, and that terrified us. So we assigned delay. Delay in clarity, delay in confidence, delay in alignment. But delay does not cancel assignment. If you are listening and your chest feels tight, it is because truth is touching memory. This point is not meant to flatter you. It is meant to wake you up. You were not unlucky. You were not overly sensitive. You were not just different, you were marked. And the fact that you are still here means the assignment against you failed. That realization alone should change how you see your life. This is only the first sign, and it gets more intense from here. The second sign you were set apart with a dangerous spiritual anointing is repeated resistance at moments of transition, not chaos all the time, but disruption every time you were about to move forward. We watched for this carefully. In occult operations, transitions are windows, moments when a person shifts levels, moments when authority is about to increase. If nothing happened when you were stagnant, but everything erupted when you tried to grow, that was not coincidence. You tried to commit to prayer, and suddenly your schedule collapsed. You tried to get serious about faith, and relationships fractured. You tried to obey a calling, and confusion intensified. We call this threshold interference. It was one of our most effective strategies, because people with dangerous anointing do not need to be destroyed. They only need to be delayed long enough to doubt themselves. I personally participated in assignments where the instruction was simple: do not stop them forever. Just stop them now. Now is where momentum forms. You may recognize this pattern. Every time you decided, this is the season I change, something unexpected hit. Sudden financial strain, unexplainable exhaustion, conflict with people who once supported you, and the timing was always suspicious. That timing was not random. We understood that when anointed people cross thresholds, their spiritual authority expands, their voice sharpens, their discernment deepens. So we disrupted thresholds. Another sign connected to this is betrayal at critical moments. Not general disappointment, but precise betrayal. People turning on you when you needed support most. Leaders misunderstanding you when you were being obedient. Friends withdrawing right when you stepped into alignment. This was intentional. In the spirit realm, betrayal fractures confidence, and fractured confidence slows activation. We assign betrayal especially to people who carried leadership oil, because leaders who trust no one hesitate to rise. If you have struggled with trusting others because of well-timed wounds, you are not broken. You were strategically targeted. Let me say something uncomfortable. Darkness studies your reactions more than your actions. We observed how you responded to disappointment. Whether you withdrew, whether you isolated, whether you questioned your worth. Because dangerous anointing does not disappear under pressure. It either sharpens or hides. Our goal was to make you hide. This is why many of you became observers instead of participants. Gifted but silent, insightful but reserved, capable but hesitant. You learned to survive instead of lead. That survival mode was induced. Another sign is cycles of false responsibility. You carried burdens that were never yours. You felt responsible for fixing people. You absorbed emotional weight that drained you. We exploited compassion heavily against anointed individuals. Because compassion without boundaries becomes leakage. You cared deeply, and that made you vulnerable. We knew that people with dangerous anointing often feel responsible for other outcomes, so we overloaded you. Family crises, friends' problems, situations that pulled you away from your own alignment, not because you were weak, because you were willing. That willingness was used against you. If you look back and realize you spent years pouring into others while neglecting your own growth, understand this. That was not generosity alone. That was diversion. Another major marker we looked for was internal conflict without external cause. You wrestled internally even when life looked stable, restlessness that would not leave. A sense that something was missing, but you couldn't name it. We feared that restlessness, because restlessness often precedes awakening. So we labeled it anxiety. We normalized as stress. We encouraged distraction, endless noise, endless scrolling, endless activity. Because silence activates memory, and memory activates calling. If you avoided stillness because it felt overwhelming, it is because stillness was dangerous to our plans. Let me be clear. People with dangerous spiritual anointing are not comfortable in shallow environments. Surface-level conversations drain you. Routine without purpose suffocates you. You need depth, meaning, truth. And when you don't get it, your spirit protests. We tried to convince you that protest meant something was wrong with you. It didn't. It meant you were misaligned. Another sign is delayed clarity. You knew you were called, but not how. You felt chosen, but not placed. You sensed direction, but not timing. This delay was engineered. We obscured clarity to exhaust patience, because impatience leads to compromise. Some of you stepped into roles too early. Some of you settled for substitutes. Some of you shrank your vision to fit your pain. Those were not failures. They were interruptions. But interruption is not termination. If you are still listening, understand this. The resistance you faced was proportional to the authority you carry. Small callings do not attract organized opposition. Dangerous anointing does. That is why resistance followed you specifically. That is why your life felt harder than others with less depth. Not because you were cursed, but because you were contended for. This is where many people misinterpret their story. They assume struggle means disqualification. In the spirit realm, struggle often means confirmation. You were not blocked because you lacked approval. You were blocked because you had it. And that changes everything. This is only the second sign. The next one will expose patterns you may still be trapped in. The third sign you were set apart with a dangerous spiritual anointing is systematic isolation disguised as protection. Not loneliness by accident. Isolation by design. This is one of the most misunderstood patterns, and one of the most damaging when left unexposed. In the occult realm, isolation is never random. We isolate what we cannot control. We separate what carries influence. We distance what might awaken others. If you found yourself repeatedly alone during key seasons, this was not because you were unlovable. It was because you were influential. I watched this strategy work countless times. People with dangerous anointing often find themselves removed from groups right before their voice matures. Friendships dissolve. Communities shift. Support systems thin out. And it always feels confusing. You didn't cause chaos. You didn't betray anyone. You didn't change overnight. Yet suddenly you were alone. We did this intentionally because isolation creates self-doubt, and self-doubt weakens expression. Let me expose something clearly. Isolation is not the same as solitude. Solitude strengthens. Isolation destabilizes. Solitude is chosen. Isolation is imposed. If you did not choose the separation but were pushed into it, that was an assignment. We isolated you so your anointing would mature without mirrors, without affirmation, without reinforcement, because anointing grows faster when witnessed. You were meant to be seen earlier. You were meant to be affirmed earlier. But affirmation accelerates authority, so we delayed it. Another aspect of this sign is being misunderstood at your deepest level. You spoke, but were not heard. You explained, but were not understood. Your intentions were questioned even when your heart was pure. This misunderstanding was not accidental. In spiritual operations, confusion around identity is powerful. If you cannot articulate who you are, you hesitate to stand fully. We distorted perception around you. We influenced how others interpreted your words. We magnified your flaws and minimized your strengths, not because you were flawed, but because your clarity threatened exposure. If people consistently misread you, it is because your spirit carries layers most people do not have language for. Depth intimidates shallow systems. That is why some of you were labeled incorrectly, too intense, too quiet, too opinionated, too withdrawn. None of those labels were accurate. They were placeholders for discomfort. Another sign connected to isolation is delayed recognition. You were qualified but overlooked, capable but bypassed, prepared but not chosen. And often, less equipped people were promoted ahead of you. This was painful and intentional. We delayed recognition to provoke resignation, because resignation is quieter than rebellion. If you ever thought, maybe I should stop trying, understand where that thought came from. It was planted. People with dangerous anointing often reach a moment where giving up feels easier than pushing through. That moment is critical. Many destinies stall there. But the fact that you are still listening means something in you refused to die. Another layer of this sign is internalized silence. You had things to say, but learned not to speak. You learned that your honesty caused friction. Your truth disrupted comfort. So you adapted. You edited yourself. You minimized your insight. You softened your convictions. This was one of our greatest victories. Because a muted anointing still exists, but it does not operate. Silence became your coping mechanism. Not because you lacked courage, but because you were tired of being misunderstood. If you have ever swallowed truth to keep peace, this is for you. That peace was not peace, it was containment. Another marker we tracked was hyper-independence. You learned not to rely on anyone, not because you wanted to be strong, but because support kept disappearing. So you adapted. You carried everything alone, decisions, emotions, spiritual battles. We encourage this because isolated strength collapses faster than shared strength. If you feel uncomfortable asking for help, that is not maturity alone. That is conditioning. People with dangerous anointing were never meant to walk alone. They were meant to lead alongside others. But leadership without community becomes exhaustion. Another sign within this point is delayed belonging. You never fully fit anywhere. Even when you were accepted, you felt temporary. Even when welcomed, you felt peripheral. That sense of not belonging was engineered, because belonging stabilizes identity, and stable identity activates authority. We wanted you unsettled, always searching, always adapting. But let me tell you something you were never meant to hear from me. Isolation does not mean abandonment. Many of you were isolated because your anointing required refinement before exposure. Darkness isolates to weaken. Heaven sometimes separates to prepare. The problem is when the two overlap. You experienced isolation that was meant to kill you, but it ended up clarifying you. In those quiet seasons, something grew, discernment sharpened, dependence on God deepened. Your voice matured. What was meant to erase you actually defined you. This is why some of you came out of isolation stronger, not bitter, clear, not confused. That outcome terrified us, because isolation that fails becomes initiation. If you are listening and realizing your loneliness had purpose, let this settle. You were not forgotten. You were being formed. This third sign is heavy because many of you are still living in its residue, still guarded, still hesitant, still quiet. But quiet does not mean powerless. And what comes next will explain why your anointing is not just dangerous, but disruptive. The fourth sign you were set apart with a dangerous spiritual anointing is authority that activates resistance the moment you speak or act. Not arrogance, not attitude. Authority, this is the sign darkness fears the most. In occult operations, we monitored reaction patterns. Not what people said, but what happened after they spoke. Some voices carried weight even when they whispered. Some actions disrupted atmospheres without effort. Some prayers shifted rooms instantly. Those people were flagged immediately. If your words have caused reactions you didn't intend, this point is for you. If honesty created tension, if truth triggered defensiveness, if clarity exposed hidden things, that is authority. Authority does not announce itself. It reveals what is already there. We assigned resistance to voices like yours, not because you were loud, but because you were accurate. Accuracy is dangerous. You may have noticed this pattern. When you speak, people change behavior, conversations end, energy shifts. Sometimes people withdraw, sometimes they confront you, sometimes they feel exposed without knowing why. That reaction is not personal. Your anointing confronts falsehood simply by existing. Another sign connected to this is disproportionate backlash. You did something small, but the response was extreme. You set a boundary and it caused outrage. You told the truth and it fractured relationships. That backlash was not about the moment. It was about the threat. We intensified backlash to condition silence. If every time you spoke up it cost you something, you learned to calculate your words. That calculation slowed your authority. But authority does not disappear because it is restrained. It accumulates. Another marker we tracked was unusual influence without title. You did not need position to lead. People listened anyway. They watched you. They mirrored you. Influence like that cannot be taught. it is carried. We feared untitled influence more than formal leadership, because it spreads organically. If people sought your opinion without explanation, that was not flattery. That was recognition. Your spirit carries command signals. This is why some of you felt uncomfortable with attention. Not because you disliked people, but because attention followed you without consent. We tried to make that attention feel burdensome, embarrassing, unwanted, because if you rejected influence, it would neutralize itself. Another sign is resistance to compromise. You could not pretend easily. You struggled with hypocrisy. You felt internal pressure to align truth with action. That integrity was a threat. We prefer people who can separate belief from behavior. You could not. Your conscience was loud. Your conviction was stubborn. This is why some of you felt restless in environments that tolerated compromise. You sensed dissonance immediately. That dissonance was not judgment. It was alignment conflict. Dangerous anointing does not coexist peacefully with false systems. Another pattern is attack after obedience, not before, after. You obeyed, then pressure increased. You stepped forward, then resistance intensified. This confused many of you. You assumed obedience should reduce opposition. In reality, obedience activates visibility, and visibility attracts confrontation. We increased pressure after obedience to make you associate obedience with pain. That association created hesitation, but hesitation does not remove calling. It delays expression. Another sign is internal authority awakening before external confirmation. You felt authority rise inside you before anyone affirmed it. You knew you were called before doors opened. You sensed leadership before placement arrived. That gap between internal knowing and external validation was painful. We exploited that gap. We used it to seed doubt. Who do you think you are? Why you? Wait your turn. But internal authority always precedes external authority. That is how it works. If you feel authority stirring now, it is not imagination. It is timing. Another critical sign is resistance that increases as you gain clarity. When you were confused, pressure was manageable. When you became clear, pressure intensified. That pattern is not coincidence. Clarity is activation, and activation triggers opposition. This is why some of you experienced sudden resistance when you finally understood your purpose, not when you were lost, when you were found. We attempted to overwhelm you at that stage, to make clarity feel dangerous, but clarity is irreversible. Once you see, you cannot unsee. Another layer of this sign is authority that exposes others unintentionally. You did not accuse, you did not confront, you simply existed. And people felt exposed. That exposure created reactions. Some admired you, some resisted you, some avoided you. But neutrality disappeared. Authority polarizes environment. If your presence shifts dynamics without effort, this is not personality. It is mantle. Let me say something directly. Dangerous anointing is not about charisma. It is about alignment. When you align with truth, deception trembles. That is why some of you felt resisted even when you were quiet, even when you were gentle, even when you were respectful. Your alignment threatened systems built on distortion. This is why the pressure felt personal. But it wasn't. It was positional. If you are listening and recognizing yourself in these patterns, understand this. Your authority has been restrained, not removed. Delayed, not denied. Challenged, not cancelled. The resistance you faced was proof of potency. And now The season is shifting. What was muted is rising. What was delayed is activating. What was targeted is being revealed. This is the final sign because it explains all the others. You were not attacked because you were weak. You were attacked because you were dangerous. And dangerous anointing cannot stay hidden forever. You have watched this until the very end because something in you recognized truth and responded to it. Comment now and confirm what you heard. Share this message. And do not keep this revelation to yourself. What was exposed today restores your authority and reclaims stolen ground. You were not delayed without reason, and you were not attacked without cause. Stand firm, speak clearly, and move forward without hesitation. This is your confirmation, your activation, and your moment of alignment. Remember, you watched until the end because this message was meant for you.